and welcome back to Bookish theories. In today's video, we'd like to talk about the Star Seekers with Tomorrow by Together, focusing on a little breakdown and analysis of episode 3 both on Webtoon and on Wattpad to see what they can tell us about this unfolding storyline. Even if I'm super late, please keep in mind that this video will contain spoilers for the third episode on both platforms, so now that we got that out of the way, let's jump right in and see what's going on. Now, the third episode of the Webtoon begins right where we left off back in the last installment. DK just became Star One's manager and trainer, and in order to test Soul's powers, he basically caused an accident that nearly killed the other 4 members of the group. In the last episode, Soul managed to create a shield to protect his friends, but it wasn't powerful enough to avoid the crash, so back in the last installment, things were seemingly about to take a very dark turn. In this episode, however, we discovered that this is not really the case, because even if Soul's magic was not enough to protect his friends, we discovered that this accident actually caused Avis's powers to awaken instead. If when he was a child Avis lost a parent and a sister, now the boy is so desperate to protect the only family he has left that he expresses his wish to get his powers like Soul, and sure enough, his wish eventually comes true. As the car is about to crash against the black water truck, Avis suddenly manifests small droplets that soon take the shape of little ghost birds. These cute little entities immediately hug the members, thus cushioning the impact when the van crashes against the truck, so even if Soul technically failed DK's test, Avis actually succeeded. Just because the members are alright, however, this doesn't mean that Soul is alright with what DK just did, so after making sure that his friends are okay, Soul stomps back to the manager to tell him what's up. At this point, Soul is furious, and to be honest, rightfully so. He squares up to the manager and even threatens to never do such a thing ever again, but as you can imagine, DK is not the type of man that scares easily. After diffusing the tension, DK assures them that he would have never allowed the members to get hurt, and the only reason why he did what he did was to see if Soul and the others actually measured up. As we already established before, Soul didn't, but Avis did, and at this point, DK tells us why with some much needed exposition. You see, according to the manager, some people are given stronger magic because they need it. If they fail to use their powers correctly, however, they risk to lose everyone around them like we just saw with the accident. The reason why Avis wasn't able to manifest his powers up until now is because he essentially didn't want them enough. Here's the thing, according to DK, the key to unleash magic is actually a desperate heart. It's not about genetics, and initially it's not even about practice, because manifesting magic solely depends on how desperately you wish for this magic to appear. Anyone who is desperate enough is able to manifest magic in their own right, but in Avis's case it's a bit different, because he also has another problem to overcome. According to DK, Avis wasn't able to manifest magic because he wasn't aware of the characteristics of his magic. As we already established in episode 1, for instance, magic people have powers who are primarily based on water, fire, and psychokinesis, but each person has specific skills and draws powers from a different source. If, for example, someone tries to manifest fire magic when their powers are actually water-based, then their attempt would obviously fail because they're essentially tapping into the wrong source. This is exactly why Avis wasn't able to manifest his powers before. He didn't know what kind of magic he had, so his powers only appeared when he was desperate enough to tap into any type of magic to protect his friends. Now, I think that this is actually a very important concept to keep in mind, because even if in this world we saw time and time again that magic can be used for all sorts of things, it's also true that its main goal seems to be to protect others from harm. Now, this is very interesting because, like I said in my last video, this also adds up with the way the boys have been using magic up until now. If in the webtoon Soul first used magic to protect his loved ones, the same happened in the Doom's Night, where Eugene's powers manifested when he had to protect Avis from the attack. In Chapter 3, the idea that magic is strongest when used as a source of protection is once again front and center with Avis, and as we see in my next videos, the same applies to Viken and Tao as well. As DK says, at the end of the day, everyone uses magic to protect people, but everyone does it in a different way. In order to discover each member's characteristics and powers, DK will train them to unlock their abilities and make their every wish come true, and even if Soul doesn't trust the man, the other members accept because they all Soul want to learn magic as a form of protection. In order to do that, however, DK's training will begin in Magic Island, which is a place located in Tucson where magic is 100 times stronger than in other places. Practicing their powers in such a magical location will allow the members to manifest their powers much quicker, so despite Soul's initial doubts, the episode ends with DK opening a portal to Magic Island and the boys flying out to reach this location. Now episode 4 will actually deal with the boys' experience on Magic Island both on Webtoon and on Wattpad, but we'll actually talk about that in my next video about the Star Seekers. In the meantime, however, we have episode 3 on Wattpad to unpack, and here we reunite with a character that everybody and their dog wants to throw out the window. Can you guess which character it is? Now, chapter 3 on Wattpad is actually called The Nightmare Continues, and here we get to know more about the nightmare that Soul started all the way back in the last episode. If you remember, back in the chapter, Eugene and Tao were practicing after hours when all of a sudden Soul had to sit down because his vision was getting blurry. As he slowly lost consciousness, Soul ended up in the wasteland that he saw in other visions as well, but this time around we actually get more information about what he saw. You see, in the dream, Soul has a premonition of the apocalypse. He sees a grey street, destroyed pavement, uprooted trees, and soon enough he realizes that what he's seeing is actually the concert hall where he always wished to perform. As we already saw in videos like Magic Island, Eternally and The Doom's Night, this is a location that no matter the timeline we are talking about, always ends up getting destroyed during the end of the world, and in the dream, Soul has the distinct feeling that he is the last person left alive. As we saw in The Doom's Night, the devastation of his surroundings makes him desperate, and much like what we saw in Magic Island, the dream is also plagued by a merciless wind that never ceases to blow. At this point, moreover, he also feels a primal fear awakening inside of himself, and as it turns out, he is also well aware of what is actually causing it. You see, in the nightmare, the source of his dread is an enormous eye belonging to a creature that he has to avoid at all costs. This is an entity that triggers his fight or flight response, so before he knows it, Soul starts to run in the opposite direction. As the rubble under his feet starts to cave in, however, Soul soon realizes that he's running in place, and as fear creeps into his heart, Soul hears a voice in the back of his mind asking him what is his wish. Now, as you can imagine, this voice that Soul hears in his mind is none other than the odd-eyed cat, and in the vision, this voice actually laughs at him. After all, it belongs to an entity that is literally playing with him like a cat with a mouse, and even if Soul tries to escape this threat, his body actually freezes in place. He tries to run forward, but his body falls back, and as the voice grows closer and his head hits the ground, Soul is eventually overcome by a huge creature pressing against his torso. As he feels sharp claws digging in his chest, Soul's eyes eventually meet the huge and reptilian eyes of the cat. Now, the fact that the cat has the eyes of a reptile here is actually very interesting, because this might actually imply that the evil cat and the evil dragon might be somehow connected to one another. In the dream, however, this is the last of Soul's problems, because the cat's attack is actually hurting him very badly. Since the boy didn't answer the first question, the cat demands once again what is his wish. In the vision, Soul's lips begin to move, and he eventually wishes for magic, because in this version of events, the boy's magic hasn't manifested just yet. As we already established in the webtoon, the boys are desperate to get their magic, and if according to DK a desperate heart is what you need to manifest your power, in this version of events it seems that a desperate heart can also lead you to your downfall as well. If you think about it, desperation was also at the core of Eugene's contract, as he was portrayed both in Eternally and The Doom's Night. If back in Eternally he told us that at the time he thought that that was salvation, in The Doom's Night Eugene and the others accept the contract because they need more power to survive. If in that video Eugene eventually seals the pact, however, in Soul's dream the outcome is a bit more ambiguous, because Soul actually frees himself from the cat and manages to run away. As the boy escapes in the rubble, the cat starts chasing after him. Soul runs and runs, but all of a sudden he finds himself at a dead end, which ends up being none other than the stage of the concert hall. Without any escape left, Soul decides to hide in a pile of rubble, and as he hears the cat approaching, the wind begins to blow once again, and the sky starts changing color from black to red and back to black. Once again, this windy devastation where the sky flashes in red and black is very reminiscent of what we saw back in Magic Island, but this time around the outcome is much different because this time around somebody actually shows up to help Soul out. All of a sudden, a ray of bright light shines through the red and black sky. This light is described as warm and mint green, and Soul immediately trusts this light to the point that he runs towards it without hesitation. As this beautiful light embraces Soul with all its warmth, the boy feels all the fear and cold dissipating in its brightness. When the light starts fading, Soul rubs his hands together to make it linger, and at that point he discovers that he has a 20-faced die in his hands. This is the same die that we already saw both in Eternally and in the Doom's Night, and this die has the very same warmth that he felt from the light. In contrast to what we saw in those videos, however, at this point of the Wattpad, Soul doesn't bring it back just yet, because when he wakes up, the boy doesn't have it. Now in the meantime, in the practice room nothing really happened. Eugene and Tao are still practicing, Avis is laying on the floor, and Viken is on his phone. This is also very reminiscent of what we saw back in Eternally, because back in that video the story began in a very similar way. Subin was sleeping after practice, he had a premonition about the apocalypse at the concert hall, and when he woke up all the other members were minding their own business in different ways. Now much like the two visions, the two versions of events are very similar, but they also have some key differences. If in Eternally Eugene was practicing with Avis, for instance, this time he's practicing with Tao. In both cases instead, Viken is on his phone, but if back then Tao was listening to music, now Avis is lying on the floor. On top of that, the two visions are different, because if in Eternally Subin is with the others, he has the book and we see the dragon, in the Wattpad he is alone, he meets the cat and is eventually saved by the star. Much like I mentioned in my last video, these differences tend to reinforce the idea that the boys might actually be stuck in some sort of time loop where the events tend to repeat over and over again. The fact that there are some key variations might actually be a way to differentiate one timeline from the next. And as it turns out, this idea might be confirmed by the next part of the chapter as well, where the conversation is actually very similar to the one that the boys had in Magic Island back on the train. You see, after Soul wakes up, the conversation actually begins with some banter between him and Viken. In true Viken fashion, he calls him a grandpa and then proceeds to take care of him with a massage. As Viken is taking care of Soul, Avis joins the conversation and the three of them end up talking about Soul's recurring nightmares. When Soul tells them that he dreamt about a cat chasing him, Viken actually proposes to Google its meaning. Avis finds that dreaming of a cat chasing you is actually a premonition of a terrible accident or betrayal, to the extent that there's also a chance of a car accident. This is something that worries Viken, but when Eugene joins the conversation, Soul decides to change the subject because he doesn't want to distract the others from practice. Now, much like what happened back in Magic Island, the topic of this conversation suddenly changes into the practice room ghost, which is an entity that supposedly haunts the mirrors of the practice room. In the Wattpad, Soul reveals that he saw the light switching on and off, and some doors opening and closing by themselves. At this point, Eugene agrees, and without having any knowledge of Soul's dreams, he suddenly reveals that sometimes he even saw a mint-colored light. This is obviously the very same light that Soul saw in his dreams, but the chapter actually ends with him changing the subject because he wants to distract himself and have some fun without thinking about his nightmares. If Soul wants to change the subject, however, I sure don't, because the fact that the light is mint-colored is a clue that might actually help us connect some dots. You see, back in Eternally, for instance, the Eternity Girl/practice room ghost was indeed portrayed as a mint green entity. This is something that we saw in Subin's memory, but also when the ghost appeared in front of Yunin Kai, so up until now we can assume that the girl that we saw in that video is indeed the entity that Eugene saw in this chapter as well. Since in Soul's dream the light comes from the sky, moreover, this clue might actually confirm once and for all that the ghost, the Eternity Girl and the star are basically one and the same. This light might take different shapes and different forms, but at the end of the day she serves the very same protective purpose that she served since day one. On top of that, the fact that this light is mint-colored might also confirm the fact that this is the you that the boys were singing about back in the Chaos chapter. This is because back when Tomorrow By Together performed at the Melon Music Awards, the 0 by 1 love song stage ended with Nausea appearing out of nowhere to melt their frozen heart. If you look closely, however, Nausea actually manifested in a a glimmer of mint-colored light, meaning that in this context she was playing the Eternity Girl who saved the boys with her light. Last but not least, I think that a very interesting detail to keep in mind is that this chapter also connected the magical die to the light, which is actually a very important detail to keep in mind. You see, when this die first appeared back in Eternally, I actually theorized that it might have been thrown by the cat, because the outcome of this throw was actually kinda sad. Now, however, it's different, because now we finally know that this die is something that actually connects them to the light. This might imply that in the Dungeons and Dragons concept that they have going on in the background, that the star/ghost/eternity girl might actually be part of the campaign, or even better, she might even be the dungeon master leading them to their goal. To know if this is the case or not, however, we'll have to wait and see. But what do you think? Who is the star? Who is the ghost? Who is the eternity girl? Let me know what you think in the comments down below. In the meantime, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you did, please think about liking and subscribing. As always, thank you so much for watching, guys. I'll see you next time. Bye bye!